back to the MCP channel. I should like to explore today the moral stance of our party through a common divisive issue on the left, and demonstrate how our position applies and talk about how our Marxist way of seeing the world should affect our moral formation. So, transgenderism then. Massive issue on the left, right? I mean, to some it's inextricably associated with what being a leftist even means. Well, the reason that I will focus on this issue is because someone's attitude towards it actually demonstrates a great deal about their own philosophical underpinnings and how they view reality. The core idea of the transgender proposition is that there can be such a thing as a person trapped in the wrong body. This espouses a form of dualism in which the soul is a true person and the body just some instrument that can be manipulated according to the will. Now, it is not the party's business in denying or affirming the existence of a soul, although our comrades personally do both, and provided that the material reality is viewed as being objective, and as such comrades who do believe in the soul must believe in a true body-soul union, not just a soul that has a body and uses it. However, what we do reject is that which this transgenderism idea ultimately boils down to, which is the supremacy of your own ideas to an external and objective material reality, and that the material exists to serve ideas and is not something objective and external to you to be conformed to, but instead can be manipulated to what your ideas or what the will desires. Nowadays, a lot of people no longer see this as being ridiculous when applied to gender for some reason, but what if we were to apply this same reasoning to parallel situations? There are some who call themselves trans-ableists, and there exist people who say, I look as if I've got 2 arms and 2 legs, but actually in my mind, I feel like I was born disabled. I'm a disabled person born in an able person's body. I mean, many will actually laugh at this, but really its reasoning is entirely consistent with that of the transgenders. These individuals want the right to have an arm or a leg cut off, to have an operation which will make their physical form conform to how they feel, or at least they hope will. The mutilation of a healthy body to align with their mistaken ideas. Not much different, in fact, from a healthy man petitioning for the right to have his male generative organs severed. There are even people who say the same sort of thing for transracials. I mean, comrades, this attitude is pure idealism, isn't it? Idealism in the philosophical sense that the material world doesn't exist, and it's whatever I think is most important. So by that reasoning, ideas are prime, and matter will have to conform with one's ideas. And the ultimate logical conclusion of this is the situation where you are alone in the world of the universe, and it may as well be a simulation or a computer game. You are the lone conscious being, and the ultimate determiner of your own reality, without reference to other people or the material reality of a world's environment around you. Now, as a philosophy, it is totally isolating, because what it does is it completely gets rid of the idea of having things in common. You can't unite on a class basis around real things that oppress us, real material and economic phenomena. Rather, it is just you, in your mind, struggling against the material, in a very Gnostic sort of way, and the most depressing part is that it is actually a struggle that can never be won. Because conforming reality to your whim is impossible, the vain attempts to do so by the idealists never bring any real sense of satisfaction. Rather temporary appeasement, but usually greater sorrow in the long term, since one realises that you've not actually transformed into another gender, for example, but have actually done something very superficial indeed. The task of transforming one's sex, for example, is utterly impossible. every chromosome in your body would have to be replaced. And what can be more disheartening than working towards something that you know is an unachievable goal? Now, to be clear, most people don't choose to be in this situation and shouldn't be treated harshly for being deluded. But we cannot affirm that which is not true. And although it is difficult, the only way to ever achieve true satisfaction is to learn to accept yourself, including your body and your circumstance. You cannot keep holding this idea in your mind and doing things to try and patch and run away from the problem as it still festers beneath the surface. It will not magically click one day. Whichever treatment will never be enough. There will always have to be a next thing and a next thing. Instead of taking to the knife, this is a mental problem, and admittedly the harsh process of learning to accept yourself is actually what is needed. We do not advocate any harshness or maltreatment towards such individuals, and this, honestly, I can't really imagine it. It must be a terrible thing to live with, despising something you cannot escape. It bears not to think, but we have to be truthful. Someone who's in the situation might not see, they might think this next thing's going to be the answer, but no amount of cosmetic surgery can solve delusion. When the mind is misaligned with reality, it is in fact the perception which must change, as material reality is external and objective. It is not subject to your desires, and will not change to line up with your own misperceptions. I must say, in fact, that many of our religious comrades have made thoroughly excellent materialists. This is because they already come predisposed with a rejection of postmodernism and relativism, and believe in an objective reality external to themselves, both material and immaterial in their case. I mean, in a certain sense, this notion that plagues us of determining reality in according to one's ideas, it can be seen as the original sin of Adam and Eve, can't it? I mean, thinking that they can know, or more properly decide what is good or evil from themselves. That knowledge of good and evil that is spoken of in Genesis, it doesn't refer to simply an understanding that there exists good or evil, but the original sin is in deciding for ourselves to determine what is good and what is evil. Your own ego turns into God, you are the centre of the universe. And it doesn't actually matter that the religious comrades believe in more than the material reality. If, say, they have another comrade, someone who believes in only an objective material reality, and then they believe in both objective material and immaterial realities, they actually share a lot of common ground when they're talking about things in the realm of the material. They certainly share more than either of them would with someone who believes reality is completely subjective and subservient to their own will. I don't care if someone's an atheist, and even if they believe that ideas are merely produced products of chemical reactions. The fact of the matter is that if you hold that those ideas are superior to and can transform nature, then you're an idealist, pure and simple. Many transgender individuals who think they can change reality because it's not aligned with their perception, many of them are atheists, but they're idealists. Morally, idealism means that whatever you want subjectively is right and correct to you, so it can actually be used to justify doing anything, committing any crime against anyone. Even secularly, we can see that everyone determining their own morality and own reality is a terrible idea. Once you throw that objective standard out the window, it relativizes everything. There has to be an objective truth, a material reality, and idealism thwarts that. Of course, the Catholic believes that this standard and this reality was set by God. However, without even taking God into account, we can clearly see what is right or what is wrong from nature, a form of ethical naturalism, if you will, using a scientific approach. It is essential to maintain that this is objective and is found in nature, and is independent of opinions or ideas of humans. Anything else would be an idealist position. And most communists actually, deep down, don't believe in moral relativism at all, and often make statements of absolute judgment such as, exploitation is bad. But let us ask, precisely why is it bad? Well, I would say it's bad because it's immoral. Now, if you wish, you can abolish any system of morality, but then you have no means at all by which to condemn capitalism. And if you're not condemning capitalism, it doesn't make much sense to be a communist. Why put all the effort in, potentially risk a life, into something that's not really qualitatively better in any sort of way? For example, if morality is relative, couldn't the capitalist have his own morality which states that wage labour is now moral? Obviously, there has to be an objective standard to appeal to in order to be able to say that anything is wrong, because otherwise people can do what they want and define it as moral for themselves. Or say they're working towards a greater good. Even your consequentialist ethics, which claim to be normative forms of ethics, ultimately boil down to relativism. Do we not think that something like exploitation in itself, not regardless of consequences, in and of itself is evil? We oppose it as communists because it's evil. Or that wage labour is to be outright condemned. Not that, oh yeah, sometimes it can be used for good results. No, it's immoral, it needs to be condemned. Or that human life is valuable and imperialist wars are reprehensible. Not that, oh, this imperialist war might aid the conditions back home. No. Launching an imperialist war against a sovereign nation is evil. Can we not say that? And if not, why are we communists? Why are we anti-imperialists? And more broadly, in terms of crimes, in our society, would we not think that murder or rape are intrinsically wrong? Paedophilia? Now, relativism can always excuse these things some way or another. But these are all moral statements, so to condemn any of these things that we've been talking about, we need some form of absolute moral system. And let me propose one to you that's very simple, but can be applied in all times and places with consistent results. It's called natural moral law. It starts only with one assumption, and it's actually the same assumption that's made by all empirical science. And it can't prove it empirically by putting it under a microscope, but you can't ever prove this, and all science is based upon it. And this is the assumption that there is indeed order to the universe. I mean, if it wasn't, why would we even do science if we were going to get a different result every time? The system uses deductive reasoning, but begins from what can be observed in nature, and then reasons on that basis. It holds that objective moral laws exist independently of human beings' desires, and can be understood by analysing the material world. Talking about the order of the universe, in the physical realm, this order pertains to physical laws and properties which allow things to develop in consistent ways. In the metaphysical realm, we're more concerned with the ultimate ends such processes consistently pursue, which we call the telos, or at least designed to do, because humans are a bit different and can actually choose to go against this to their own peril. So to find what these ends are, we use observation, which is why we call this theory a posteriori, because it starts from those sense experience. Studying this, the natural law says that things are good when they achieve the ends to which they are ordered towards. A good tree grows tall, a good knife is sharp and cuts well, and the very same applies to moral actions. And now, it's important to note that what we mean when we say natural, it's not what comes naturally to you, i.e. what's easiest for you to do, but it's actually doing something, you think about it, and then you do it in accordance with what it's ordered towards, and often that can be the harder thing. Now, some would dispute this, saying that there's a difference between what is, which is arguably what natural law is saying, this achieves that end, such as trees growing, and what ought to be, so that you wouldn't say that trees would have to grow to be a tall tree in order to be a good tree. However, we would say that the ought is indeed included in nature, since Aristotle's final cause, the telos of things which we spoke of before, is actually intrinsic to the world. Hearts are for pumping blood, seeds are for growing into trees. These are not projections of our mind, they will happen independent of it. With that being the case, then, there does exist an objective standard of goodness and badness. But final causes themselves must exist, as without them it is impossible to explain why things consistently tend to have the consequences that they do. Now, human beings are a bit more complex than a knife or a tree, and as the tree has two ends, to grow and reproduce, we are more complex still, so we say that a human being has 4 or 5. The first, protect and preserve innocent human life. The second, to promote procreation. The third, to educate children. The fourth, to create an ordered and harmonious society. And the fifth, if you're religiously inclined, to worship God. Each of the previous precepts provides the most optimal conditions for the next precept to be achieved most fully, so it's like a cascade in that sort of way. The first precepts are supposed to be very obvious towards us instinctually, and it's what we have in common with other animals, even though some people do advocate killing, which frustrates even the first precept. As for the fifth precept, a belief in God isn't actually necessary for understanding 4/5 of the natural law anyway. You could operate pretty well on a system with 4 of these precepts. Whether you personally believe in God is actually irrelevant, although I would hold that all societies in history, if they managed to fulfill the 4 previous precepts, did begin to think a bit deeper and to have spiritual yearnings, and there has been good anthropological evidence to suggest that it has consistently been sought throughout history. For example, even societies that had no explicit revelation or scriptures, when they got developed and stable enough to begin to display spiritual yearnings and common traits, they displayed these things like a common sense of guilt and a desire to make sacrifice to atone for that guilt. But for us, as a secular party, for the most matters in general life as well, we're not even near to talking about the 5th precept, as they usually relate to the first or the second. The party only has business in ensuring the first 4 precepts are achieved, which should be common ground with all of us. And the religious comrades hold that this then would create the ideal situation for the worship of God anyway, which is, something quite difficult when being killed or starving. So it is helping towards that either way. Whereas the secular comrades can also just see the 4th precept as an end in itself, as a form of earthly human flourishing. However, one of them, which is quite a main thing, will be dealing with exploitation, is actually quite a high-level issue, being contrary to the 4th precept. And the same can be said for most economic issues, which is why there's probably more controversy around them than something like killing, for example. Apart from the primary precepts which spell out the ultimate ends for humans, the general principle of doing things in accordance with their ends can be applied to nearly every situation consistently, yielding the same result, if you're intellectually honest. Recte ratio agibilium. For example, things are good when they achieve the ends to which they're ordered towards. Like we said before, a good tree grows tall, a good knife is sharp and cuts well. Well, the same applies to moral actions. So, abortion would be an interesting one. The scholastics did not have the scientific knowledge we have today about conception, and they thought installment of a fetus occurred later on in pregnancy. I think it had something to do with when it began to, first kick, something like that. But however, they still opposed abortion from day one. Why is this? It's because the end process of pregnancy what is ordered towards eventually is childbirth if something doesn't happen to stop it. And thus to forcibly prevent that from being achieved is a bad thing. If this happens in nature, And this we still commonly say today, like in an example of a miscarriage, we say it's a tragedy. But if a man commits this himself, it is something that's morally evil. Murder could be another example. It's very obvious, this one. Killing a man goes against the telos of man, which is to live, procreate, educate, order society, and if you want, worship God. If you end his life, it prevents him from doing this, so in a way he's falling at the very first hurdle. If this happens in nature, it's a tragedy. If another man does this to him, it is morally evil. Also, you could look at contraception, a slightly trickier one. We're going to have to use a bit more reasoning here. From the study of biology, we can see that the primary end of a marital act is of course procreation. However, there also exists a secondary end, union. Modern science confirms this teaching by showing the release of oxytocin when the couple perform the act. Why? In order to create a strong bond between the parents and stable domestic situation for children to be raised in, which is why it's actually a secondary end, because that's actually still serving procreation. Therefore, to separate either end goes against what the act itself is intrinsically ordered towards, and is immoral. Contraception is immoral, but also something like placing a bag over your wife's head to use her as a soulless incubator only for children is extremely perverse, as it frustrates the unitive end. Anyway, I hope this is an interesting and useful video and helps dispel the idealistic relativism and provide an introduction to an objective and scientific form of ethics, natural moral law. Science in the sense of any rational body of knowledge that knows a thing through its causes. You can see, with the use of reason, this standard of doing things in accordance with their ends can be applied to almost every action and even dilemmas to come that we don't know about yet. If we start living life in accord with the goals which it's ordained, then you will experience human flourishing. We just need to use our heads. Alright, comrades, reject idealism, combat subjectivity, and uphold material reality and moral standards that we must conform to. Until the next time, everyone, have a good one.
教国的奴隶，起来，全世界受苦的